First of all, thank you for Paul. I have been his student for the longest time, but every time I just feel so inspired by his passion. His life is so much about this subject, and it has just an impact so many people. And thank you for Jean, very insightful and not the kind of theologian that's very dry, but full of life and blood and real story. And I really, really learned a lot from everyone who has shared. But my response is trying to take a little bit different track. As you know, Paul, I'm Asian and I'm pragmatic. I love hearing a lot of your theology has really inspired me, changed me. And I never have problem thinking work is actually, we will find God, we will see God at work. So that's not the part I'm even going to debate about. But I'm much more interested in how we see God. How do we increase our capacity to see God, to sense Him, and to find Him? So I think my presentation will be more focused on that, if you guys is okay with that. So Paul, you mentioned the beatific vision of daily life, which is really to see God in all these different contexts. And you have been extremely articulate and argue for that, which is something that you paint a vision that we are very aspire to. And especially about prayers. All this comes through prayer without ceasing, and prayer that is work and work that is prayer. It really should be integrating rather than segregate. I think it's also a part that I'm not going to argue. I once talked to my spiritual director about, we all complain. We don't have enough prayer time, it's busy and so on. Then he asked me, other than dedicated prayer time, do you communicate with God on your daily basis? I say, yeah, I think about God all the time, when I walk the bus station, when I am in office. Then he basically, you have been praying. A lot of the time we have this idea, we need to have a quiet time, we need to have a secret corner. But actually, it's just not your whole disposition, I think. And if we count those time, a lot of you probably praying a lot more than you think. And Paula Darcy is a very famous writer. And she said, God comes to us disguised as our life. Actually, everything you come across in life, God is the disguise behind that. But the problem is not whether God is there. It's our receiver. Our capacity to see Him and find Him and sense Him. And in the past few years, I've been especially we are teachers, we are mentors. I think a lot of the problem is not so much about maybe 10 years ago in Hong Kong. We still have to argue a lot of the secular, sacred divine. But nowadays, I think people kind of quite accept, work is also a kind of manifestation of God's work. A lot of the questions, like Jean just mentioned, they are just overwhelmed with daily, the challenges, the tensions, all these difficulties in their life. But I think that, of course, we can resolve them, help them, counsel them. But in the end, it is the capacity to perceive and see God in all this, even as the worst problem. So in the last few years, I have been a student of Ignatius Spirituality, because I do think that in terms of all the different stream of spirituality, of course, we're Protestant. My basic brought up is very rational, Bible study, and even our prayer, a lot of time is like laundry list, So I find actually Ignatius Spirituality particularly relevant for marketplace, because it's really meant to combine and integrate life and prayer. So I don't know, the background of this group, maybe ranging from some people who are very familiar to someone who just probably had a little bit, but not too much. Last year is actually the 500 years in memory of Ignatius. So last year there was quite a big, I think, renewal or re-emphasis of his spirituality. So one of the very famous writing from him is the spiritual exercise. Actually, I think among Protestants, we know we have quiet time, spiritual practice, but we don't really look at it like kind of as seriously. I think a lot of the church setting in terms of our Bible study teaching, we always tell us the end game, the vision, what is the ideal state. But I think there's a lot of things that actually, if you talk to an athlete, other than giving them very inspiring video on how to get gold medal in Olympic, a big part of a coach is the day-to-day, how to help them train themselves, and how we can help disciple or train our people is a lot about teaching them to understand their own emotion, their desire, and their spiritual movement inside. So I find the Ignatius spirituality have a lot of wisdom and practice, years, and we all are familiar with Jesuit. They are one of those that have most combined contemplation and action with very deep spirituality, not the type that just, stay in the monastery. Although it's also okay. We have different stream or denomination. But I think marketplace spirituality is something more than a mixed life. It's actually very active. And actually your inner life constantly interact with your external world. So I'm not going to go on too much but what I'm trying to say is by practicing this exercise, something very important for us is that we will develop a disposition to find God in all things. Like Paul, you mentioned, how can we be praying unceasingly? It's not by just hiding in corner 24/7. It's actually how we develop and cultivate this attitude, this orientation, this disposition. And for Ignatius spirituality, spiritual integration is the most prominent theme in terms of combining contemplation, action, emotions and reasons, prayer and service. So I always talk about spiritual fitness with my students. A lot of the time they want to see God, but they can't see. We all know that the problem is not with God. The problem is our capacity to see. And we all want to be great athletes if you're trained to compete. But why I can't have those kind of performance, it has a lot to do with the exercise you do on a daily basis and how you interact with your coach. Are you really aware of your own emotions, how self-aware you are? We see a lot of people, the saints, the model Christians, they do this, but why we have that gap? So the Bible has said very clearly, spend your time and energy in training yourself for spiritual fitness. And physical exercise have some value, but spiritual exercise are much more important for it. In 1 Timothy chapter 4. And I actually love the Message translation the best because they say, exercise daily in God and no spiritual fatness. A lot of us are fatty spiritually because a lot of the time we get together, we praise God. Maybe we share a lot of time talking about peak experience. We love to hear great testimony. That's great. Yes, mountaintop experience. I love it. But we have to understand, big part of our Christian life is enhancing our capacity in seeing God, finding Him in the most ordinary day-to-day struggle, mundane. So I don't want to go too much about the spiritual exercise. I always encourage my students to do that, but not many people have 30 days in their life. So they have another version called the 19th annotation, which is 30 weeks. That is something that I'm finishing with my spiritual director. I have 4 more weeks to finish. And I think that you don't need to be spiritual exercise particular per se. But I think when we really want to have that capacity to see God and find God, we all need to have some plan on how to have this exercise. It can be this, it could be that. I know there are many other denominational streams. This is more kind of just as an example, and it's something that has worked for me and a lot of people I know. So the most important, as far as I'm concerned, if you say, I don't have 30 days, I don't even have 30 weeks. But I think you can start as simple as a daily examine. Daily examine from Ignatius' point of view is the most important quarter of an hour. I don't want to elaborate here. I don't know how maybe most of you have practiced and know it very well, but it's just a daily reflection of 10 to 15 minutes that you talk to God directly. You review your day's emotions, the ups and downs, and reflect on and talk to God about what that particular emotions come about. Because for Ignatius, they trust their experience. Because not that we are led by our experience, but our experience is the best clue to our heart, our desire, and also a starting point for the spiritual movement. So I think we need to have, especially in marketplace, we have discernment is very, very important. And in particular, if you are very angry, bitter because of an incident at your workplace, the first thing you really should be talking is to God. You have to have a dialogue with God. What happened? What's really believed? And can you review to me? And how? Because the good thing about it is just looking at the past 24 hours, not more than that. And actually, what we need to ask for the grace is the next 24 hours. On the back of that, what is the kind of grace I will need for the next 24 hours? And I think the key is not so much about a revelation. It is really just a very practical way to pray without ceasing, because you have a chance to review your last 24 hours, and you have a chance to talk to God about your next 24 hours. Anyway, I'm not going to elaborate too much, but all its benefit can only be realized if you start and cultivate the habits. It's like if you want to be a good athlete, you may need to have basic, strength, basic tenacity, and basic persistence. I think this is an exercise that really helps us to heighten our sensitivity and our discernment in terms of the spirit in our life. So at the end, I think it's not so much about our circumstances. Margaret Seed, she's a very famous Catholic writer. A lot of the time, our first reaction when we meet with problems, we want to, like at the outer circle, we want to move from point A to point B. Then we think that, our problem will be resolved. But if the who in the middle doesn't change, exactly the same problem will happen. Even you move work, you change circumstances. So I think the spiritual exercise, the examine, etc., I talk about is really about letting God to move the who. So maybe at the end, your circumstances has not changed. You're still faced with that monster devil boss. But when you really go into yourself, you discover a lot why you react in certain way in the emotions. And most importantly, the spirit. I know that at the end, we are just holistic. Every of our decision or our reaction is a combination of our heart, our spirit, and the external world. It's not just everything from the heart. But I think Paul, being a very practical person, I don't question the vision. I loved it. But I think the big part, a lot of the time, for a lot of the challenges of people in the marketplace, It's really their ability, their capacity to see that, to find that. And how to get there is just not being discussed, I think, enough. I'm not saying this is the only way, but I think it's important for mentors, for teachers, and for us to kind of really get a way how we can increase that capacity. I think that's what I want to share. Thank you.